All right, we're getting ready to throw the crankshaft in, hopefully for the last time. I've had it in to just check it, make sure everything rotated fine, and then also had it in, well, I did that at the same time, but to do the, to check the compression height or the deck height to see how I needed to get it, see how much I need to get the block decked, basically. So, bearings already have a little bit of assembly lube from last time. I did clean them up. We popped them back in. I'm gonna throw some more assembly lube on them. I'm gonna set the crankshaft in, and then we're gonna just go through and I'll torque the crankshaft down and make sure everything rotates smoothly. And as long as that's good, then we're gonna flip the engine around and we're gonna go ahead and start installing the pistons. Now, check your, when you put your bearings in, of course, they have the little tab. Make sure that lines up. Make sure there's not a top and bottom of the bearings. Make sure all your oil holes line up. And this is our back bearing, and you can see it's got a little tab in the middle. Like I said, I had the crankshaft in, so they've got assembly lube. I just threw them back in the box when I pulled the crankshaft back out of it. And so I'll spray them down, clean them up. That's what I've been doing, spraying them down and cleaning them up and putting them back in the block. But you can see this one's offset. So this back bearing is different. The cap side of it has a notch in the center. So just make sure you keep track of that. And then we need to clean that up. Yeah, and that brings me to a point, make sure all your bolts are good. So when you torque them down, you get a good torque reading. This one needs to be cleaned up. So we'll check that hole down in there, clean that up as well. I'll pull that bearing out, clean that hole up, and then we'll continue on. All right, all the bolts cleaned up, and we are ready. I'm gonna clean the rest of the bearings up. I'm gonna throw some assembly lube on here, and then we're gonna set the crankshaft in, and then we'll put the caps on and torque them all down. Crank is in. Don't worry about there's WD-40 on this. That's why it looks like that. I'm just trying to keep the crank from rusting. Cleaned up the main bearings, got the WD-40 off, and then we're gonna, right before we put the pistons in, I'll clean up the, I'm using old socks, but they're clean, of course, and spraying them down with brake clean, and then going around the crankshaft to get the WD-40 off, and then we're going to put assembly lube and all that, and the assembly lube will protect the crank. You don't want this thing flash rusting. WD-40 does a great job of preventing that. So crank is in. I'm going to put the caps on, torque them down, make sure everything rotates freely, and then I'll flip the engine back over and we will be ready to start installing pistons. All right, all the caps are ready to install. So I cleaned up all the threads on them, clean up the block, the threads on the block as well, run a tap through them. Make sure you get all this stuff clean. You don't want anything messing up your torque readings. Like I said, this is not a how-to video. I'm just trying to show y'all as I go along. But as you can see, the cap side of the bearing is different than the block side of the bearing. Make sure you don't get them flipped around. You're gonna be, it's not gonna be good for you. So as you can see, solid bearing, no hole, no groove. And then we go over to the, well, I showed you on the crank side. The crank side has the hole in it and it has the groove in it. That's for the oil to go around. Of course, the oil goes through the hole and then it flows in that groove around the bearing. And then the top side is just a solid bearing. So make sure you don't flip it around. It will starve for oil and you will spin a bearing. So I'm gonna go through and start installing the caps. We're gonna put some I use Clevite bearing guard assembly lube. It's a red, real thick oil, and I use that on all the bearings. It's always worked well. As long as I can remember, that's stuff I've used, and the bottle I have of it is actually fairly old, but still good stuff. So I'm gonna go through, lube all those up, lube all the caps up, put them in, torque everything down, and like I said, we'll rotate the engine over. All right, crankshaft is torqued down. This is the location of the windage tray studs or bolts, and I did 70 on all the center ones and 65 on the 6 outers. And I did look up the torque specs, and what they did recommend doing is start the center, work your way out. I did bump, 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 and then leave this one, just the bolts just run up, not torqued, and then just make sure the thrust bearing is centered. Work this back and forth, and make sure work the crankshaft back and forth, make sure the thrust bearing is lined up top and bottom the same, and then you can torque this one. Do 3 equal torques. So I did 25, 50, then 70, and then 65 on these. And I've got 3 not so good, well, people hate on these things, but they actually seem accurate as long as you store them not loaded. But I set them, since I've got 3, we need to do 3 equal torques. I set all 3 independent, for my 3 stages, so I could just quickly work through and just swap torque wrenches without adjusting, get them all the same. And then I went through, as a final check, I reset one of them to 65, checked the outer ones, and reset it again to 70, so that my final torque is verified between 2 of these torque wrenches, these 2, so that we make sure that if it's not accurate, we're at least compensating by checking it with 2 torque wrenches, but it seemed to be correct. So now we're ready to flip the engine over. Before I do that, I'm going to clean up the rod journals of the crankshaft so that they're ready, they're cleaned up and ready for the rod bearings. So I'm going to do that real quick. Make sure your crankshaft rotates easily. I mean, it's going to have some drag because that assembly lube is very thick, but it's very smooth turning. There's no catches, there's no spots where it seems to hang up. Just make sure it's a good smooth movement, rotation, and it should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over, and I'm going to clean out the bores real good, clean the crankshaft, and start putting pistons in.